The anniversary party was held at a rented hall just off the highway, white tablecloths, low lighting, a pianist in the corner playing songs no one really listened to. It was the kind of gathering that looked elegant in photos but felt cold in real life. I arrived late on purpose. Claire was already there, of course. She stood by the main table with a glass of champagne in one hand and her other hand resting lightly on Mom's shoulder, like a politician posing for a campaign photo. I barely had time to take off my coat before she caught my eye. "You'll never inherit," she said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear, but still wearing that social smile she always reserved for public scenes. People laughed. Someone clinked a glass. My mother looked away. My father adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. I didn't respond. I just raised my glass and sipped. It tasted like nothing. They moved on quickly. Claire had stories to tell about the new fellowship her name was attached to, about a donor gala in New York, about our family's work as if she had built it from scratch. No one asked me where I'd been. No one asked why I hadn't spoken at the last board meeting, or why the foundation newsletter no longer had my byline. Maybe they didn't notice. Maybe they were told not to. I found a quiet spot near the drinks table. From there, I could see the whole room. Dad laughing too loudly. Mom keeping her smile fixed. Claire gesturing like a TED speaker while distant cousins nodded along. It was a performance. It always had been, and I'd been part of it longer than I cared to admit. I remember the first version of this party, 10 years ago. Back then, Claire hadn't joined the foundation yet. She was still figuring things out while I was running operations, managing donations, building systems behind the scenes. When she finally came in, she did so with a website and a photographer. She said she wanted to elevate the brand. I thought she meant the foundation. I didn't realize she meant herself. That night, while people danced and posed and posted filtered pictures online, I wandered into the catering prep area just to breathe. I sat on an overturned crate and looked at my phone. One unread message from Dad: "Can you forward the grant breakdown before Monday?" "No, thank you." "No, hope you're enjoying the night. Just business, even here." Eventually I walked outside. It was cold, but I liked it. I stood in the dark, watching my breath form clouds. Someone inside started a toast. Applause followed. Claire's voice rose above the rest. I didn't catch the words, just the tone. Confident, polished, final. When I turned back, through the glass doors, I saw her standing beside the cake, hand on Mom's back, eyes shining. I wasn't in the photo they took. Later, as guests trickled out, someone handed me a gift bag with a printed card thanking me for attending. My name was misspelled. I drove home in silence. No music. Just the hum of the heater and the weight of something settling in my chest. Claire's words echoed not as a threat, but as confirmation. You'll never inherit. Not just money, not just property, the legacy, the story, the credit. And maybe, in that moment, I realized she was right. I wouldn't inherit what they built. Because I was the one who built it, and they'd already given it away. The next morning, I opened my laptop out of habit. The desktop was still cluttered with documents I hadn't touched in months. Foundation reports, draft proposals, budget templates with color-coded tabs. I clicked through them slowly, as if they belonged to someone else. They didn't. They belonged to me. My fingerprints were on every formula, every timeline, every strategy that had kept the foundation upright while Claire smiled into cameras and gave speeches she hadn't written. The files had my name buried in the metadata, if anyone cared to look. No one ever did. I pulled up a folder labeled Operations Eva. The one Claire once joked sounded too corporate. Inside were 5 years of back-end work. Payment schedules, disbursement logs, contracts I had reviewed and signed because our parents didn't understand half the legalese. I'd handled it all, not because anyone asked me to, but because when the deadlines loomed and the stakes rose, I was the one they turned to. Quietly, efficiently, invisibly. I remembered the first time Dad called me in a panic. A funder had pulled out last minute, threatening to derail a scholarship program that had already been publicized. Claire was in Bali. Mom was unreachable. "Can you figure it out?" he asked, voice tight. I did. I moved money across 2 accounts, restructured the reporting cycle, and emailed the funder a revised pitch within the hour. They stayed on. The program ran. At the gala, Claire got the credit. "Her vision is what saved us," Mom said on stage. I stood in the back, holding a clipboard. I told myself it didn't matter, that what mattered was the impact, not the attention, that being the backbone of something meant you weren't meant to be seen. But something shifted last night. hearing Claire say it out loud. So publicly, so easily. You'll never inherit. She wasn't just talking about money. She was reminding me of the role I'd been assigned. Useful but not essential. Trusted but not valued. Present but never part of the narrative. I scrolled through my inbox. Messages from vendors asking for updates. A request from a junior staffer needing login credentials. Claire had told everyone I was still on call. But I hadn't been paid in 3 months. My contract had quietly expired. No one mentioned it. I clicked into the foundation website. Claire's face was everywhere. Press clippings, quotes. A new video banner labeled, Her Legacy, Our Mission. It was a timeline of the foundation's growth, starting the year Claire joined. No mention of the years before, no mention of me. I closed the browser. Around noon, I walked to the post office to send a package. On the way, I passed a small community center. They used to partner with us. I remembered sitting in their cramped office, helping them apply for a matching grant. They sent us handmade cards every Christmas addressed to the foundation, not me. I wondered if they knew I wasn't part of it anymore. I wondered if they'd notice when their funding was delayed, because no one remembered how the back end worked. When I got home, I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the floor. No music, no distractions. I looked at the walls of my apartment bare, undecorated, a space that never felt lived in. I'd always told myself I'd add art, curtains, maybe plants, when I had more time, when the foundation was stable, when Claire took on more of the load, but the load never shifted, and time never arrived. That afternoon, I opened a new document, blank. I typed a title, Separation Process. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't even emotional, it was logistical. I began listing every system I had built, every login I still controlled, every file stored under my cloud account. I wasn't planning revenge, I was planning exit, because now I understood. I was never meant to inherit. But I was done giving everything away. 3 days passed before anyone reached out. Claire sent a message on Slack. Urgent dashboard not syncing. Then another, more casual. Hey, have you seen the donor report? Numbers are stuck. I didn't reply. I wasn't being petty. I was being precise. My login was still the spine of every system, and my silence was starting to show. By the end of the week, I got a call from Dad. Twice. I watched the screen light up, then go dark. A voicemail followed. Eva, could you check in with Claire? She's trying her best. But the grant portal isn't updating and payroll's behind. He didn't ask how I was, just that I fix it, like always. I deleted the message. The next day, a junior coordinator from the foundation someone Claire had hired sent a nervous email. Hi, Ava. Sorry to bother you, but I can't find the latest tax compliance template in Drive. Claire said maybe you had it. I stared at the message for a moment, then archived it. They weren't used to things breaking. I had never let them. On Friday, I received a notification that someone had tried to reset access to the foundation's accounting software. It was registered under my credentials. The attempt failed. I smiled. They were scrambling. Still assuming access was a formality, not a structure I built from scratch. The phone rang again Saturday morning. Mom this time. She left a voicemail too, softer than Dad. Hi, sweetie. I know things have been difficult, but your sister is under a lot of pressure right now. Could you just talk to her? She's asking for help. I didn't respond. There was a time when I would have called back, when their discomfort would have pulled me in. But now, I let the silence stretch. That night, I reopened a private archive I'd created years ago. A drive labeled Contingency. Inside were versions of every form, every grant cycle, schedule, email templates, compliance audits. Things Claire didn't know existed because I had kept them running without disruption. For her, they were part of the scenery. For me, they were labor, invisible, until removed. On Sunday, Claire finally sent a long email. No subject line. Just text. Can we please talk? I know things are messy. I didn't mean for any of this, but we need to figure it out. I read it twice. She still said we, as if we were still part of the same machine, as if I hadn't already stepped off the track. The following week, a compliance officer from a third-party audit firm reached out. They couldn't reconcile the foundation's quarterly filings. Some key documents seemed to be missing or mislabeled. We'd appreciate any clarification you can provide. I didn't reply. I forwarded it to the foundation's generic inbox. then closed the tab. I wasn't obligated to hold their structure together anymore. Midweek, one of our former partner organizations posted a subtle message on their website. Due to delays in funding from our sponsor, we are operating at reduced capacity. I knew what that meant. They were one of the programs Claire had insisted on showcasing in our annual gala, smiling for photos beside people whose names she never remembered. I'd written their original grant myself. I remembered every number. Claire called again, once, then texted, "Why are you doing this?" I almost laughed. I hadn't touched a single file. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had simply walked away. What was unraveling wasn't my doing. It was the weight of systems she never learned to carry. That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and listened to the city move. Not in chaos, just in rhythm. Somewhere out there, Claire was rewriting spreadsheets, panicking over logins, calling consultants who didn't know where to start. And somewhere deeper, the foundation once a living thing was beginning to hollow. Not from attack, from neglect. I didn't feel cruel. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt still. They were learning the lesson I had always known but never spoken. What you take for granted will eventually take its leave. And not everything that walks away slams the door. Some things just vanish quietly, completely, and for good. By the start of the next week, the gaps I had left behind were becoming visible even to those who had never looked closely before. I received an email from a senior grant manager we once collaborated with. The subject was brief. Need help. The body was shorter. Eva, I know you've stepped away, but nothing's sinking. Claire's overwhelmed. Can we talk? I didn't respond. I didn't forward it. I didn't owe them the clarity they once denied me. I closed the laptop and went for a walk. Later that day, I passed by the cafe where we used to host small donor roundtables. I remembered sitting in the back with spreadsheets while Claire took credit for insights I had drafted. I remembered her laughing when someone once called her the brain behind the brilliance, and how no one corrected them. I used to think silence made me humble. I understand now that silence was what they depended on. My absence, however, was not silent. It was loud in the things that stopped working. On Wednesday, a new email came, not from the foundation, but from their legal representation. A polite inquiry masked in jargon. We request your cooperation in facilitating the transition of administrative access related to the Foundation's operational infrastructure. It wasn't a threat, not yet, but the language had changed. They were no longer pretending everything was fine. They were beginning to understand that I hadn't left messily. I had simply stopped cleaning theirs. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my personal backup drive, labeled Eva Structure. Inside were organized folders containing every critical system I had designed: tax calendars, donor tiers, budget forecasting sheets, media release protocols. I hadn't kept them to hurt anyone. I had kept them because I was always the one who remembered things. Now, I was the only one who could forget them. On Thursday, Dad called again. This time I answered. Not because I wanted to, because I needed to hear what he'd say now, that the curtain was falling. "Eva," he said, his voice measured, like he was trying to sound calm. "We just need access to the donor portal. That's all. Claire's tried everything. Could you just help us fix this, and we'll move forward?" I didn't say anything at first. Then, finally, I asked, "Move forward to where?" He paused. "What do you mean?" I let the silence stretch until he filled it. "I mean, things got a little off track, but we can bring you back in properly this time. You'd have more say." I almost laughed. More say in a system I had built? I ended the call without answering. That evening, I received a voice memo from Claire. Her voice was unsteady, unguarded. "Eva, I'm sorry. I know I should have said this sooner. I didn't know how much you were doing. I thought—" She paused. "I thought it would hold without you. I thought I could just take it from here. But it's falling apart, and I know that's not your fault. I wish I had listened." I didn't replay the message. I deleted it. Friday came with another email, this time from a journalist I vaguely remembered from a past feature on women in philanthropy. She was following up on rumors that the Foundation's internal records were missing. "Off the record, can you comment?" I didn't reply. I wasn't interested in stories. I was interested in endings. That weekend, I cleaned out the last drawer in my desk. The one with old staff thank you cards, lanyards from conferences, handwritten agendas from board retreats. I burned most of them, not out of anger, just to make space. The fire smelled faintly like paper and perfume. I watched it until only ash remained. Sunday night, I received a final email from Claire. No subject line, no salutation, just a sentence. You were the foundation. I closed my laptop and turned off my phone. Then I lit a candle, opened a book, and read until the sun started to rise. I hadn't destroyed anything. I had simply stopped holding it up. Monday morning arrived with overcast skies and the kind of quiet that felt earned. I brewed my coffee slowly, standing barefoot in the kitchen, letting the warmth settle into my hands. I hadn't opened my inbox in 2 days. There was nothing in it that required my attention anymore. What needed to fall was falling, and I didn't need to hold the rope or catch the pieces. The foundation was breaking in places I had once reinforced, not by sabotage, just by absence. That afternoon, I walked by the community health center we used to fund quarterly. They had painted their front wall a fresh orange, cheerful and out of place beside the crumbling curb. I wondered if they'd received their latest grant. I doubted it. Claire never remembered that their tax ID was slightly different from their public name, one of those small details that made or broke disbursement schedules. I remembered because I was the one who filled out the back end every cycle. They'd probably send an email soon. Maybe already had. It wasn't mine to answer. Back home, I opened a drawer and found one of the Foundation's old annual reports, 2017. The cover had a photo of a smiling child in a library we helped build. Claire's quote sat at the bottom in italic serif. We believe in access for all. I had written the first draft of that quote. Her version cut out the context, made it sound more elegant, more marketable. That year, we closed a gap in literacy funding across 3 counties. Claire took the stage to announce it. I stood in the wings with a headset and an emergency contact sheet. On Wednesday, I received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a copy of the Foundation's financial audit. Unofficial, messy. Notes scribbled in the margins, in a familiar hand. Claire's. The numbers didn't balance. Disbursements were missing receipts. Vendor contracts unsigned. I flipped through quietly. Toward the back, in different handwriting, Dad's was a note on a sticky tab. We need Eva to review this. That used to be my entire identity. Needed. But only in emergencies. I didn't respond. I went to the market instead. Bought eggs, kale, and a loaf of bread from a man who called me ma'am and didn't ask where I worked. That night, I made a spinach omelet and ate it while watching the streetlights flicker on. I thought about the months I had spent worrying whether stepping back would be seen as betrayal. Now, I realized what they had expected from me wasn't loyalty. It was silence. I had broken that contract simply by walking away. On Friday, I met someone from the early days. Janine. She had worked on our first pilot program before Claire even joined. We ran into each other at a bookstore. She hesitated, then said, I heard what happened. I hope you're okay. I nodded. I'm fine. She tilted her head. You don't seem angry. I shrugged. What's there to be angry about? She was quiet for a beat. Then she said, They always talked about you like a resource, not a person. It took me too long to notice. I smiled politely. I wasn't here for apologies, but I accepted the clarity. The weekend came with rain. I spent most of it reading, the kind of reading that had nothing to do with research or policy. Fiction. Stories where the women left and didn't come back. Where leaving wasn't failure. It was freedom. On Sunday evening, I received a package. No note. Just a box filled with printed thank you letters. Dozens of them, handwritten by kids, teachers, small nonprofits. Some addressed to the Foundation, some addressed vaguely, to whom it may concern. One addressed to me directly. Eva, thank you for helping my school. My mom says you are like a secret superhero. I think you are real. I stared at it longer than I meant to, then placed it on my shelf. Not to display, just to remember. They thought I left because I was bitter. But bitterness is loud, sharp, quick. What I carried was quieter, older, like stone settling. They had assumed I would return eventually, that my need to be needed would outweigh my need to be free. But what they never understood is that I never needed the Foundation. I needed to be seen. And now that I finally saw myself clearly, I didn't need them to. By the time Monday arrived, I had stopped checking the news about the Foundation. It no longer felt relevant. The headlines were smaller now, buried under newer scandals and brighter distractions. Operational delays. Continue at Chambers Family Foundation. Donor transparency concerns arise. I didn't click the links. I didn't need to. I knew the rhythm of collapse. It was never immediate. It cracked slowly, in places people didn't look then all at once, when it was too late to patch. That morning I reorganized my closet, not because it needed it, but because I had space for silence, for rituals, for myself. I folded every item I used to wear to meetings and placed them in a bag marked Donate, blazers, button, downs. Flats I wore because heels felt like performance. I kept one black dress, not for funerals, but as a reminder of the days I dressed like someone they could trust, if only I disappeared behind them. Around noon, I walked to the nearby park. A mother was helping her child learn to ride a bike. A man in a blue jacket read a paperback on a bench. The sky was clean, clear, uncaring. I sat under a tree and breathed through the silence. No one needed anything from me. I felt, for the first time in years, weightless. Midweek, I received another email from the Foundation's legal team. We are formally requesting access to archived operational files created during your tenure. Please note, this is part of our internal audit process. I recognize the tone. It wasn't quite a threat, but it wasn't a request either. I read it once, then drafted a short reply. All documentation created under my personal account remains my intellectual property, per the original employment agreement signed and filed in 2015. I do not consent to transfer. I didn't send it immediately. I let it sit for an hour. Then I hit send and closed the tab. Thursday afternoon brought a card in the mail, handwritten, from one of the first interns I had mentored. I don't know if you remember me, it began, but I remember you. You made the work matter. You made it human. I placed the card on the counter, beside the thank you note from the child. My name was written in pen, carefully. Not printed, not generic, just mine. That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "It didn't fall because I left. It fell because they thought I would never leave." Friday came with a familiar number calling Dad. I answered. He sighed into the line like someone who had rehearsed his part but forgot the first word. "Your mother's not doing well," he said finally. "She's upset. She thinks the Foundation was part of our identity." I waited. "Claire's taken a leave of absence. She's not speaking to anyone. It's a mess." I didn't say anything. He added, "We didn't mean to push you out." I almost laughed. "You didn't push me out," I said. "You just never thought I was in." Then I hung up. That weekend, I visited a small town 2 hours away, just for the day. No meetings, no agenda. I sat in a used bookstore and flipped through journals. One of them had a quote scribbled on the first page. "Sometimes the most generous thing you can do is remove yourself." I bought it not because I believed in fate, but because I liked the quiet defiance of it. That night, I went home, made a simple dinner, and wrote for myself. Not a report, not a strategy, not a pitch deck, just words. My words. Unfiltered. Unmeasured. The Foundation had become a shell. The donors had backed away. The partners had grown quiet. The website was down for maintenance. The legacy they tried to craft was unraveling not from scandal, but from absence. And I was still here. No longer theirs, but fully mine. The following week arrived without urgency. There was no fire to put out, no last-minute brief to fix, no late-night calls masked as just a quick favor. I woke up when the sun reached my window, not when a notification told me to. The first thing I saw was the journal I had left open on the nightstand. My own handwriting, my own words. I traced the lines without reading them. For years I had written for others. Now, the silence on the page was mine to shape. On Tuesday, I passed a bulletin board outside a nonprofit community center. A flyer read, "Seeking volunteers with grant writing experience." It was printed on standard paper, black ink, no logo, just need. I stood there for a moment reading every line. Then I took a photo of it not to act on right away, just to remember that help existed outside of performance. That service could be quiet, unbranded. Later that day, a message arrived from an old board member. Not Claire, not Dad. Someone who used to nod approvingly at everything Claire proposed, then turned to me for the logistics. His message read, "If you ever consider coming back perhaps in a different capacity, we'd welcome the chance to rebuild." I didn't reply, not because I was angry, because I had no interest in rebuilding what had never been mine to begin with. They wanted my labor without my presence, my clarity without my voice. Now they had neither. That evening, I opened an old email thread from 2 years ago, a discussion about restructuring staff roles. I had suggested decentralizing operations to reduce burnout. Claire had replied, "Eva, don't overcomplicate it. We need a face, not a system." I closed the tab. I didn't need to prove a point. The proof was already unraveling in real time. Midweek, I received a donation receipt from the shelter. A simple email. "Thank you for your contribution. Your support means we can keep our doors open through winter." I hadn't attached my name, but I knew they remembered. Not the press photos. The presence, not the strategy decks. The quiet consistency. On Thursday, I walked through a part of the city we used to host fundraisers in rooftop gardens, polished table settings, name cards arranged in calligraphy. I remembered standing behind the scenes, double-checking guest lists, correcting misprints on donor bios. Claire would arrive late, makeup perfect, voice rehearsed. "We couldn't have done this without our incredible team," she'd say, but I was never introduced. I was the team. Now, the rooftop was empty. A for lease sign hung at the entrance. The building had outlived its usefulness to them, just like I had. Friday brought a message from Claire, just one sentence. "I'm sorry it took losing everything to see you." I stared at it for a long time. Not because I didn't believe her, but because part of me, somewhere deep, had once waited years for those words, and now that they arrived, they meant nothing. I didn't need her to see me. I had already seen myself. That night I printed out the message, folded it, placed it in the back of the journal I had started, not as proof, as closure. On Saturday, I donated the last box of foundation materials, papers, folders, branded notebooks to a recycling center. The man at the counter asked, "All this from one place?" I nodded. "Used to be." He didn't ask more. He just took the box and handed me a receipt. I left without looking back. Sunday came with wind, the kind that made windows rattle and trees bend. I stood at the balcony, holding a mug of tea, watching the leaves scatter below. There was something cleansing in the way. The wind made no distinction. Old branches, new blossoms, it swept them all. And when it passed, what remained stood a little clearer, a little quieter. The foundation had been silent for days. The website still under maintenance. Social pages inactive. No statements, no rebrand, no revival. And for the first time, the silence wasn't mine to hold. It was theirs. Sunday night came quietly. I stood by the window, a familiar cup of tea in hand, watching the street below dissolve into quiet shapes under the amber streetlights. A breeze slipped through the crack in the frame. Somewhere, a siren in the distance. A dog barked once. Then stillness. The kind I had longed for, not the stillness of waiting, but of release. I thought about the version of myself that used to dread Sunday nights. Preparing, planning, tensing for a week, built around other people's urgency. That woman doesn't live here anymore. Earlier that day, I had visited the small bookstore down the block. The owner recognized me now. She always kept a shelf near the register filled with journals, hand-bound and imperfect. I ran my hand over the spines until I found a new one-linen cover, deep forest green. I brought it home and opened to the first page. I didn't write anything yet, just held it. A blank beginning, and for once, no pressure to explain myself to anyone. Later, I checked my email out of habit. A single message had arrived from the Regional Nonprofit Council. A formal notice. The Chamber's Family Foundation has been officially marked inactive and removed from our annual registry. One line. No sentiment, no summary of impact. Just a declaration that something was no longer there. I exhaled. The way you do when you've been holding a note too long and finally let it fade. I stepped out that afternoon and walked through the neighborhood. Past the mural we once funded, now peeling at the edges. Past the school where we ran a reading program, the banner still hanging, though faded. The world hadn't stopped. People moved. Lives kept circling. And yet, pieces of the old work still lingered, like fingerprints long after the hand had left. Not because of the foundation, but because something good had once been done, quietly, without applause. That was enough. I passed by the community center again. The flyer about grant-writing volunteers had been taken down. In its place was a new one. Thank you to all who stepped up. I smiled. Not everything falls apart when you leave. Some things grow in the space you vacate. The myth they believed that I had abandoned them was only half true. I had left. But what failed afterward wasn't because of absence. It was because they had never truly learned presence. At home, I played a voicemail I had saved for weeks. Claire's voice again, tired, soft. "I'm sorry, Eva. I know it's too late. But I want you to know whatever's left, you built it. And whatever I ruined, I'm trying to understand now, even if I never fully can." I listened once, then again, then deleted it. Not out of spite, but because I didn't need her voice to narrate my story anymore. That night, I made dinner slowly, chopped garlic with intention, let the sauce simmer. I lit a candle just because I wanted the room to smell like something warm. I ate alone, not out of loneliness, but because the solitude felt earned. I had spent years making room for others, holding space, shrinking my own needs, translating every silence into understanding. Now, I let the quiet speak for itself. After dinner, I opened the journal and wrote one sentence across the first page. "You don't have to be visible to matter." Then closed it. Tomorrow, I'd write more, or not. There was no pressure now, no false urgency, no legacy to manage. I looked around my apartment. It was small, but mine. No vision board, no framed awards, just plants, soft light, and the kind of peace that doesn't demand attention. On a side table, the thank you card from the child remained, tucked behind a stack of books. I hadn't moved it. It didn't need a spotlight. It reminded me of something I used to forget. The work had always been real, even when the recognition wasn't. My phone buzzed once more. A message from an unknown number. Likely another reporter, or maybe an ex-colleague still trying to piece together a story that had already ended. I turned the phone face down. Some endings don't require responses, just distance. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Leaves chased one another across the sidewalk, laughing in motion. I pulled the window closed, let the latch click into place, and drew the curtains shut. Not to block the world, but to hold it at its rightful distance. There would be no final statement, no public reckoning, no dramatic return. I would not step into the rubble and help them rebuild the story they had once rewritten without me. Because the real ending had already happened, long before the files disappeared, before the signatures dissolved, before the headlines faded. The real ending happened the moment I realized that I didn't need to prove I had been there. They had erased me, but I had left fingerprints on everything, and some truths, even in silence, don't fade.